While found footage horrors vary in their effectiveness, the VHS series combines found footage with an anthology presentation, giving us a handful of horrors meant to freak us out and maybe even disgust us. VHS 99 is coming to Shudder, but does it deliver? It's the beginning of a new millennium where technology is undergoing a massive shift. Before smartphones, we had camcorders to capture the mundane and the exciting aspects of our lives. And sometimes the horrors were captured too. VHS 99 brings an anthology of found footage horrors caught as the century and millennium come to a close. So we got 5 different horror stories that are presented in this movie. There's Shredding, which follows this indie band who visit a place of a horrifying disaster. There's also Suicide Bid, where we watch a group of sorority sisters take hazing to a brand new level. Then we have Ozzy's Dungeon, which is a twisted and nasty kids game show that takes a very unexpected turn. There's also The Gawkers, which shows why voyeurism may be dangerous to your health. And finally, there's To Hell and Back, which is literally what it says. So the presentation of this is like watching old VHS tapes that have been found. I mean, it's a great concept, but in this one, the distortion, the tracking, and the jumpiness of the tape, I mean, it just got to be too much in that first story. There was so much noise on the tape that it really made it hard to make out a bunch of what the action is going on. And then because it's being filmed in a darker location, this makes it even harder to discern what's happening. Now we can still get the gist of the story, but some of the gruesomeness is difficult to see, which I think is a bummer because the practical effects look to be amazing. There is some gnarly makeup that complements the story really well, and then there are also some very visceral imagery and sequences that are pretty disgusting, but again in an awesome way. Most of the characters in this story are also unlikable, so it's easy to root against them, which means rooting for very bad things to happen to them. Now, the concept of this story is intriguing, and it works to set up a creepy vibe. The characters go into this underground area that served as a concert venue and an artist collective. Now, a tragedy had occurred there, and now it's supposedly haunted. And a couple of the sequences, as they begin to explore, they establish a dark tone. And when that's combined with their terrible personalities, a sense of hopeful dread begins. For me, this was the weakest of the stories in the anthology, but the effects and the gore were really well executed. In Suicide Bid, the story revolves around a sorority hazing, and is a disturbing tale. I mean, there are some claustrophobic sequences that are then made even worse by the introduction of unexpected items. Now, I am being vague here because when it happens, my skin was crawling. Now, this is a very tight story. It's concise, it doesn't waste time with unnecessary tangents, and it gets us right into the uneasy dread. And for this, I really appreciate that the video footage isn't all distorted and hard to make out. I mean, most of the visuals are well lit, and they're captured cleanly so that we can experience the terror that our characters are experiencing. And just like in the first story, there are practical effects here that are wonderful. And really, that can be said about most of this anthology. The use of practical effects adds a layer of awesomeness to the presentation, which then gives us a good sense of realism to what we're watching. Now, the story called Ozzy's Dungeon is probably the most messed up story in this anthology. I mean, it involves a very twisted and wrong kids contest show that has some bad things happen, which then make more bad things happen. While the story is effective in making me squirm and be grossed out, it did go on a little too long. I love the emotion and the vehemence that's captured by the actors. There's a huge sense of dread and peril that's present, and it's then made worse by some very sickening ideas. There's so much to like in this story, but what stood out to me most was the end. I mean, it's twisted and dark. And darker than the rest of the story, which is hard to do. But I love the sick nature of what's revealed. I mean, this isn't a happy story, and none of them actually are, but this is even less happy. And the story called The Gawkers, some boys learn why spying on people may not be the healthiest of actions. It follows a few teenage boys who don't have much to do other than to skate and watch their neighbor from across the street. There are horny perverts who creep on the attractive woman that lives right near them. This story does a great job of setting up these guys that are like future felons of America with how they voyeuristically film their neighbor and then lust after her. There are small clues to what's going on, but we don't really get any confirmation until right near the end of the story, when all hell breaks loose. That being said though, this is probably the tamest out of all of the horror stories in this anthology. And I really appreciate that while there is some video noise and small instances of static on the visuals, the overall video quality isn't too grainy or hard to see. Now for the final story in this, we get a glimpse of what hell might be like. To Hell and Back shows what happens when 2 guys who are hired to film a demon summoning at the end of the millennium get actually transported into hell. If you saw that super amazing Shudder movie Deadstream, this last story is written and directed by the same duo that did that movie. Now as an aside, if you have not seen Deadstream yet, you're seriously missing out on one of the best horrors of the year. But getting back to VHS 99, To Hell and Back is sparse in set design. I think they filmed in Utah in some craggy rock valleys, but it's shot at night with the light of the video camera only illuminating a small area of the landscape at any given time. And what makes this such an engaging story is that the characters have a very limited amount of time to get to a place if they ever hope to escape hell. They meet beings and creatures along the way, and again, the practical effects and the makeup, they're stellar. The actors are also very emotive, even if we can't see them. So much is conveyed through their voices that we can just feel their levels of fear and pain. And there's a decent amount of violence, but not all of it happens on screen. Most happens right outside the camera's viewpoint, which actually doesn't detract from the visceralness of the action. This is one of my favorites from the anthology, and if you watch all the way through the credits, there is going to be a bit of audio that ties into this last installment. Is it important? No, but it is fitting. So if I were to rank these from best to worst, I'd go Suicide Bid, To Hell and Back, Ozzy's Dungeon, The Gawkers, and then Shredding. Now, all of them are worth watching, and the creativity that's employed, I think it's awesome to see. So overall, VHS 99 is a creepy anthology that heavily relies on practical effects to create visceral and grotesque imagery. The stories are tightly told and effectively unsettled, with some providing some chuckles amidst the gasps. Sometimes the distortion, grain, and tracking issues of the video quality are too much, making it difficult to discern what's happening on screen. But for the most part, this is an engaging and disturbing horror show. There's no sex, some nudity, a ton of profanity, and a monster amount of violence. I give VHS 99 4 out of 5 couches. So are you a fan of this series? Which is your favorite movie? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me.